My name is Rob Zeski. I'm the CEO of the Ground Truth Project, which is the home of our flagship program, Report for America, which also is home of Report for the World. Delighted to be back in my home state of Minnesota. We have a special thanks to Minnesota Public Radio. So much of the Minnesota Public Radio team here helping us out tonight. Really appreciate it. Special thanks to our panelists. So thank you for being here as well. We're excited to get you started. We're here tonight in a pretty tense time, and we understand that it's a challenging moment for our country. And against the backdrop of political turmoil and increasing polarization, we know that local news is also facing some significant, demonstrable structural challenges. So amid the doom and gloom that we feel sometimes and see about our industry, we also are feeling like we have a lot to celebrate. So starting this week for us with our hundreds of early career journalists that are here this week from Report for America for our national gathering. They hail from every corner of the United States, and each one is dedicated to providing fantastic local trusted information to communities everywhere. They're launching their terms of service this week, and we believe that that is indeed a reason for optimism as we celebrate today. So for those of you who don't know, briefly, Report for America was born as the first national service program for journalism. We launched in 2017, and since our launch, we have placed nearly 700 early career journalists in newsrooms in what they tell us are career-making positions and opportunities to build skills and make a difference in communities. With roughly half of that group identifying as journalists of color, we are also one of the largest pipelines for diverse journalists in the country as well, addressing what we believe are longstanding inequities in journalism. We've also learned through our program that by placing fantastic journalists to do new news in undercovered areas, we're also able to attract new audiences and new revenue. And so in the past 7 years since our beginning, we've helped local partners raise nearly $30 million in revenue to support their news operations and make the journalism that they do much more sustainable. So we're delighted to be squarely in the news sustainability business as well. And now, having worked in about 400 different newsrooms across the country, we're starting to see some pattern recognition in our understanding and seeing the bright spots that are the future of local news. And so we're delighted to be able to talk about some of those tonight. It's no coincidence in that respect that we're here in Minnesota to talk about those bright spots. We'll be celebrating all week, and we know that this state has an incredible wealth of fantastic local news. So partners like NPR, certainly Star Tribune, we'll be talking about MinnPost, Minnesota Reformer, and others. RFA is particularly pleased to have supported the first 3 reporters at the Sahan Journal, which we're delighted about and feel like that is obviously an exemplar of what we think the future of news can look like. So we're excited to be a part of that. We know that Minnesota is not immune from the challenges facing local news everywhere. So we're going to talk tonight a little bit about those challenges and the pressures that we see that are a microcosm of the challenges we see playing out everywhere across the country. So we're delighted to be here. I hope we'll find some kernels of excitement, optimism, and reason for hope, which we believe we're seeing every day, not only in our reporters, but in communities everywhere. And with that, I'm turning it over to my friend, Jean Taylor. Thank you.
Thanks, Rob. Hi, I'm Jean Taylor. I'm the CEO of Minnesota Public Radio and the American Public Media Group. Rob, thanks for bringing this wonderful crew to Minnesota. We really appreciate it, and we're proud of the news media that's going on here and glad that you can be here and be part of it. I want to welcome all of you on behalf of NPR and on behalf of all of Minnesota journalists for being here. Minnesota is the place that celebrates all 4 seasons, and we have brought you a week of a perfect summer. So hope you enjoy that. A lot of organizations, in order to motivate themselves, look at their competitors, and they try to beat their competitors so that they can get more profit. And I think one of the reasons that in Minnesota our news media has really created a great ecosystem is that we don't look at each other as competitors and say, we've got to get you. What we do is we look at a goal that we all share, and that is about strengthening Minnesota and how we want that to happen, and it pulls us together and it makes it all stronger. So rather than the enemy being each other, the enemy is things like citizens who are uninformed, right? The enemy is lack of trust. The enemy is communities that are divided, and that's who we want to defeat together and to vanquish. But to do that, it's really important that we find great ways to collaborate. And as we collaborate, it's important not to have each of us try to be everything for everyone, but rather each of us to figure out what is it that's unique about us and what we bring to the table. What is it that is our greatest strengths, and how can we do that? And then we come and we can gather around, and we can all throw our strengths in the pot and create our stone soup, right? That is going to make us all stronger, but more importantly, make an even greater impact in Minnesota through that collaboration. A couple weeks ago, we had one of our great American holidays, the 4th of July, and you know, Americans celebrate that holiday in a lot of different ways, right? Some people get together with family and friends, and it's about connection, and it's about relationships. Some people like to watch spectacular fireworks, right? So you have these loud sounds and these bright lights that are a symbol of what we believe and a symbol of our truth. Some people like to go to a parade, right? And the parade, you get all these things passing by that shows the variety of what a community is about. We, in our profession, are, I think, of the most American of professions, right? We are embedded right in our Constitution in terms of the importance of our work for the democracy. And it's really important that we share that impact and that goal of making our communities stronger and making our democracy stronger as a whole. So when we are doing our best, right, we are building relationships and connecting folks, just like on the 4th of July. We are shining a bright light on the truth. We are showing communities for everything that they have and making sure people see the great variety in communities. And coming together and understanding that importance, what we do, is absolutely critical for the model going forward. So hoping that we can all find more and more ways to collaborate and do our best for this country and for democracy. I am really looking forward to the conversations tonight. Thank you all for being here, and I'll turn it over to Angela. All right.
Thank you. Oh, to Morgan. Thank you.
I need to steal that one. Perfect. Thank you. Hi there, everybody. I promise to keep this short. For those of you out there, there's still some chairs in here, and we would love to welcome you. Mm-hmm. Thank you, Jean and Rob, and thank you all for being here. Many of you got emails from me to get in this room, so I'm grateful. I'm Morgan Baum. I'm the Director of Local Sustainability for Report for America, and I have the honor of introducing Angela tonight. I also just so happen to be from central rural Minnesota. I'm from Hutchinson. I'm a devoted muckraker. I am a consumer of local news, many of your local newses, and I am just thrilled to see so many of my greater Minnesota neighbors in the room today as we talk about partnerships across the entire state. I believe all Minnesotans deserve trusted, representative, unbiased, and accurate information. So thank you guys for being here. So over to Angela. She graces our airwaves every morning at 9 a.m. and as the host of Minnesota Public Radio News. And you may know her from her more than 25 years of television on WCCO, KSTP, and CNN. She's originally from Virginia and a graduate of the University of Maryland. And earlier this year, she was inducted into the Hall of Fame at the Philip Merrill College of Journalism. She's also a nominee for the National Association of Black Journalists 2024 Salute to Excellence Awards, and so we're pulling for you. If she wasn't here tonight, I have it on good authority, thanks to Sean, that she'd be in service of local journalism somewhere else. And you are a change maker, and you have wanted to be since you were 12 years old, which is pretty awesome. Thank you for inspiring all of us. Angela is an Emmy and Gracie Award-winning journalist, and she's an extremely skilled moderator, which is why I asked her to be here. So please join me in welcoming Angela to this.
Welcome to Minneapolis, everyone. I'm Angela Davis, and I'm honored to have you here with us at the Weisman Art Museum for this special Report for America event. We are here to talk about something that I care about deeply, how to reinvigorate local news. According to some research done at Northwestern University, the state of local news is grim. More than half of the counties in the United States have no or very limited access to local news, and areas without local news, so-called news deserts, are growing at an alarming rate. Plus, we know that trust in news is at an all-time low. So, how do we turn that around? This is a big topic, so we're going to break it up into two conversations. The first is with philanthropy leaders who are leading the change to champion and reimagine local news. And the second conversation will be with journalists who are doing the work and trying to figure out a new way to cover the entirety of our great state. So let me introduce our panelists, which I have to say is a powerful group of women leaders, right? All right. So next to me, I have Maribel Perez Wadsworth, the new president and CEO of the Knight Foundation. And the Knight Foundation is the nation's leading philanthropic supporter of journalism based in Miami. Maribel is also a veteran of news. She's worked as a reporter, an editor, and eventually as the president of Gannett Media and the publisher of USA Today. And to say that she's had a front row seat to how news has changed over the last few decades, that's an understatement. We're so glad to have you here. Welcome to Minneapolis, Maribel.
Thank you. So glad to be here.
Next to her, we have Dale Anglin. Dale is also new to her role. She's the inaugural director of Press Forward, a growing coalition of national and regional funders committed to strengthening local news. And we'll be talking a lot about Press Forward during our conversation. So that's all I'll say about that for now. But Dale, we're thrilled you could be here with us. Congratulations, too, on your new role. Thank you for joining us. Yeah. Tanya Allen is here. Tanya is the president of the McKnight Foundation, not to be confused with Knight Foundation. McKnight is a Minnesota-based family foundation that supports all kinds of good work across our region, be it clean energy, neuroscience research, or supporting local news. Thank you for your time, and welcome, Tanya.
Thank you.
And finally, we have Talia Palmer. Talia is the CEO and president of the Blandin Foundation, another Minnesota-based philanthropy. Blandin's particular focus is strengthening rural communities across Minnesota. Thank you for coming to Minneapolis, Talia. All right, well, let's get to it. Maribel, I'll start with you. Since Knight Foundation is a big player in this field, tell us why you think journalism, specifically local journalism, is key to a functioning democracy.
Well, look, I mean, everything that happens, or most everything that happens that's so important, so directly impactful in people's lives, happens locally. And we have seen that as the news ecosystem has been so disrupted, as you've lost coverage, as you've lost whole newsrooms, it's a devastating void. People don't have access to the information that they need to make critical decisions in their lives. But even more than that, we've lost those connections that we heard Jean speak about as we were introducing this today. The idea that that local news organization is a place that helps to foster a sense of community, a sense of place, that helps to reflect the community back onto itself. I think we can all agree that it would be great if we reconnected again with our neighbors, if we found pathways to work together on solutions, to celebrate the great things that are happening in our communities. And it sure would be great to do that from a common fact base. And so I don't see anything more critical right now than strengthening that local news ecosystem again as a means to bring us back together, to focus us again on common ground and common solutions.
I have in my notes here that in your first speech as Knight's CEO, that you attributed your family's Cuban roots for teaching you that democracy is not easy to rebuild once torn down.
Absolutely. I mean, I think many of us, and here in Minnesota, we have so many people who are not originally from the U.S. and who have come here for a lot of the same reasons, seeking opportunity, seeking freedom that might not exist in the places that our families originally came from. And my own family, coming from Cuba, when they first came here, I think they really believed they'd be back 6 months, a year later, when democracy came back. And 60 years later, they're all still waiting. So we just can't take it for granted. And I will say, growing up here, having the blessing of having grown up an American, I think I did probably take it for granted. I think I took American democracy as a given. And I think what we have seen and are experiencing is that that is not the case, and that it is something that requires us to be active participants.
Dale, you lead Press Forward on a national level. Tell us about the launch of the Minnesota chapter.
Oh, we're so excited. Press Forward has several pillars. We focus on policy, infrastructure. One of those pillars is local. And so even though there are national funders, now over 60, that are part of Press Forward, we believe that it's really important to set tables in local communities so that those local communities, starting with foundations, but including journalism organizations and other partners, can think holistically within your region. What should your media and local news system look like? We know there are issues. We know we can build it back better. There are lots of bright spots, but we need multiple people at the table thinking about what that should look like, how to fund it, how to build the capacity of some of our new reporters to get into some of those wonderful new nonprofit newsrooms. So the local chapters, we now have 25 chapters in over 20 states. We're hoping in a year from now to have at least one chapter in every state. Some states will have more than one chapter. This week, Press Forward Minnesota launched. Each chapter is a little different. We're really excited. They are a statewide chapter, even though there's multiple, Minnesota's a big state, but Tanya's bringing them all together, and Tim. And they will be they have set a table, actually they've now got an advisory board and a grants committee to really think rationally about there's missing gaps in this particular community. How can we supplement that? How could people partner together in the newsrooms? How can we build capacity for revenue diversification within those newsrooms? So we're ridiculously excited, to be honest, to have them as one of our newest chapters. And they've been leading the way on some of our local calls, talking about some of the things that they've been doing. And that you have stars in your midst, like, Sahan Journal, former president, or now moving off. So we're ridiculously excited. That's why we're here. We were here for this yesterday, and then we're here for this tonight.
And have you found that Minnesota is a leader, that our news landscape is unique in some ways in our many different offerings?
Every state is different. And there are definitely states where there is a lot more cooperation already amongst the journalism entities. And I would say Minnesota is one of those.
In a good way.
In a good way.
Okay. All right, we're winning. So, Tanya, you had the McKnight Foundation, a Minnesota organization that focuses on several local issues, and news being one of them. We're grateful for that. McKnight is also a big supporter of Press Forward. So tell me how you think that the business model needs to change to make local news more sustainable.
Okay. So thank you, Angela. But first, I have to Dale wouldn't brag on Minnesota, but I will.
Okay. And you're not a native Minnesotan.
Yeah,
you're from Detroit.
So, yeah, exactly. I'm from Detroit, so we like to brag there. I know that this is not a trait of Minnesotans, so I'm bringing it here. I will just say that we were one of the very first local communities to raise our hand to say that we would put this up, and we're one of the very first to stand up this effort. Yeah. And it's because of our very rich philanthropic community who stepped up really quickly around this effort, including the Minnesota Council of Foundations, the Bush Foundation, and the Glenn Center. So I just want to make note that there are so many people who've been involved in putting this together, and we're just really proud to be partners with them. And the reason that we think that this is so important and why the McKnight Foundation raised our hands really early in this process is because we at the foundation have twin imperatives. We believe in climate action, and we also believe in equity. And for us, equity is about centering the people who are furthest away from power. And so what we know is this: if we want to move climate action, and if we want to move racial equity in this state, we have to depoliticize these issues. And we need good media for people to understand the importance of these issues all across the state. That indeed, these issues are actually really about sustainability. How are we sustaining the places, repairing the places that we live, sustaining them and keeping them whole? How are we creating a growth agenda across our state? And so we believe that media is a part of that. And we also believe that media is a part of strengthening our democracy. We believe that media creates an opportunity for us to bring communities together. We also think that it's a way for us to hold power accountable. And it's an opportunity, I would say, for us to democratize what I would say hope and action. And so that's why we think it's really important for us to show up on this issue, because we believe in the power of Minnesotans. And we think that when Minnesotans know more, they'll do better. And we think that there's a lot of opportunity for us to do better, because as we diversify as a state, it's important for us to show up even more powerfully than we have in the past.
And Tanya, in your time here, have you seen some ways or discovered some ways that the business model needs to change so that local news can be more sustainable?
Well, Angela, I think that first I would just say that I think that local media has to really reflect the people that it serves. It needs to show the people who live in these communities their stories. It needs to look like the diversity of the people. It needs to look like their aspirations, the opportunities, the possibilities of their communities, as well as sometimes the challenges in their communities. And I think that we've sometimes been one-sided in telling the challenges of our communities. And if we can tell the holistic and authentic part of who we are as a community, I think that our communities will value media in a different way. And once they value media in a different way, I think we can convince them that you have to pay for it. Mm-hmm. And then if we can convince them that that good journalism costs, and that, misinformation and disinformation is free, that it'll be easier for us to get that type of investment going. And I would just say that I think that the role of philanthropy, that we have a role in this, which is why I think Press Forward is here. Like, we can help spark that engagement with community members across the state and helping them understand, helping build models that people can understand that they can contribute to this, particularly through the nonprofit model. But we also have an opportunity to jump into public policy to help communities understand that if we believe this is a core part of our democracy, then maybe we need to have some resources that come from our state or from government resources that actually help support and sustain this ecosystem in a way so that we have these multiple sources of funding that actually create a rich and diverse ecosystem that actually really tells our stories and helps our state be such a rich and robust place for ideas and solutions. So that's how I come at thinking about what the models could look like. But the last thing I would just say is that I don't know what the answer is, but what I do know is this, that I think we're smart enough to figure it out here in Minnesota.
Talia, I want to bring you in here because Blandon Foundation has a special focus on supporting rural communities across Minnesota. If you listen to my show, I'm always talking about I grew up on a farm, so I have great affection for rural communities. But what are the unique challenges that greater Minnesota communities face when it comes to news?
Well, two things that I want to say is I've never been in front of a room full of journalists, so I'm a little...
We're not so bad.
that sort of sunk in right before you hit the cue. And then I don't like the lineup that I have to follow Tanya's awesome remarks because I am not as polished. There are a lot of challenges for this in rural Minnesota, rural America, and I think that we're in a moment in democracy in the United States where we're really seeing how critical it is to address issues in our rural places and understand what is happening in rural places beyond news and media. I really appreciate the comment about looking at public funding and whether or not we want to look at news information as part of the infrastructure of our state systems. And then you get into the details of how would that be distributed and how do you ensure that there is checks and balances in that approach. But as we look at rural places in Minnesota in particular, and do research at the Blandin Foundation, we know that we've got an incredibly long system of attritional loss in our economy, and news and media is part of a broader conversation about attritional loss. But at the same time, I want to talk about like the strength of rural people and resiliency and resourcefulness that comes from this sort of model of like the loss also creates like strength in people. But I do think that news and media is just part of other conversations that are happening around like the changes in the rural infrastructure and logistics.
In the introduction, I talked about news deserts. We know that there are counties here in Minnesota where we're seeing school board meetings and city council meetings and county commissioner meetings with no reporters present. And so does that concern you when you think about just places that get no attention?
I think that it should concern us all. And I think that every time we're turning on the television, we can see the repercussions and the unintended consequences of this. And then we're also needing to look at the parity model and equalization. When you have a sparse population, that's going to change how financing works. And it's also going to change the cultural dynamics of reporting independent news and what it would take to be a journalist in a rural community reporting the truth and dealing with the consequences of having to report that truth. I know earlier I was talking to somebody about the problems of journalists even finding housing in rural communities. And so you start stacking the complexity of this, and like news and media is sort of the tip of the iceberg behind it. And then to sort of add this role of philanthropy is philanthropy can't be the sustaining model of any nonprofit organization. We need to continue to be the spark or the catalyst that opens up these conversations related to policy issues and like the startup funds that happen for these organizations. I live in a community that has 700 people. We have no news. We never know when the city council positions are open. We don't know when there are public hearings. We have a Superfund site we're not getting information on. It's a really, really big public crisis that relates to like health. And if you take that and scale that across rural America, we can see how critical these opportunities are that the other speakers are talking about with Press Forward and these initiatives. Like we're really responding to the moment right now.
Maribel, the Knight Foundation has been in the business of journalism for a very long time, and you've seen technology, I'm sure, change the way we consume and produce news. And in some ways, it's changed for the better, and in some ways, it's really decimated what used to work. So, are you seeing some examples of how technology could be part of the solution here?
Technology is absolutely part of the solution, and we've seen all the good that comes from that. It has created so many more ways to do journalism, to create content, to connect with your readers, your viewers, your listeners. It's really important that we never shy away from embracing that evolution and using the tools to our advantage, again, in terms of connection, in terms of creation. There's no question that there are a lot of real threats that come with technology too. Some of them certainly to the business model of journalism. We've seen that as more and more the dominant digital platforms have really become gating factors to connection with audience, to the ad supply chain. But it also is an enormous contributor to the pollution of the information ecosystem. All of the ease of creation has made it easy to create a lot of garbage content, a lot of intentional disinformation as well. So we're trying to solve for existential business model challenge for journalism at the same time that the entire information ecosystem is so muddied and confusing and leading to exacerbating the trust issues that exist for news media. It's certainly a very complicated time, and yet I don't think that we can turn our backs on technology. We really need to see how we embrace it for the good that it brings and insist on, again, from a policy perspective, the ethical standards for the use of technology that can hopefully start to mitigate some of the harm.
Mm-hmm. When I was a local television reporter, I remember being frustrated how technology, enables us to do things so quickly, but to get, a live image. I used to spend time flying around helicopters when I worked in Dallas over the scene of something that happened. Like, I could get there quickly, we could get video of it, but until we landed and got on the ground and were able to interview people, the information, like, some things just take time.
That's right.
Right? And so there is no technology that can replace the ability for people to have ethics and to be patient and to be willing to sit with editors and check facts. So fact-based journalism.
Verification still matters.
Still matters.
Still crucially important, right? And certainly everyone in this room agrees with that. And we see it over and over again. There's a lot of content out there masquerading as news that I would not call news. I certainly wouldn't call it journalism, because we all get that there is a process, there are standards, there are ethics that go into the work that we do in journalism that we trade off at our own peril.
Talia, I know the Blandon Foundation has supported several very interesting initiatives when it comes to communities in Greater Minnesota. Could you give us a couple of examples that really proved to be successful, that you're just really proud of?
Okay, KXC is here, and they're panelists in the next room. One of the things that I love about the work that the foundation has done is we've done long-term funding for organizations. ICTV is here. It's one of the few local television providers, news providers in a rural community, and so I'm really proud of doing long-term funding. It's also really challenging to do long-term funding. So we learn a lot from our grantees. That's something, really important to learn from, like, what are their challenges? What is it like to be doing this work? And we also provide, like, technical assistance and programming to communities that have lost their local media and news, and figure out creative ways for them to tap into technology in a responsible way, to share regular content, at least to provide people with, like, local events and local information.
And there's interest in it. There's high interest.
There's very high interest in that. And, one of the things I want to add about, like, the rural element of this is that there is research that shows when rural people are reading local news, they're more likely to engage in community. And when they read national news or state news, they politicize it. Mm-hmm. And the local news provides, if you will, culturally a sense of social cohesion and engagement and order in community that is really lost. And so that shift, when we're talking about technology and the smartphone essentially becoming a commodity in American homes, there's really no control over how that social engineering is happening in homes that are in these rural communities. And that's really problematic to the social cohesion that we're seeing. So a lot of small communities are trying to tap into that. But there also exists this challenge that there's very limited funding going into rural communities. And so we have to make really hard decisions about what we're able to fund fully and effectively, and what we're not able to fund as well.
You have to pick.
We have to choose.
Yeah. Right. Tanya, we've talked about many communities, regions across Minnesota that have no access to local news media. How can communities support local news, individuals or groups of people that want to do something? Have you seen something, or are there some ideas of you think that the individual could do, or small communities do something?
Well, I think the first thing I would just say is, like, there are many of us that actually can support media, and we can support it at a higher level. And so it's our way of supporting community. If we can do more, we ought to do more. I think the days of all of us getting access to news and everybody gets to pay 25 cents or 50 cents. I know the papers are now $1.50, but that day of like everybody having an equal share is no longer here. I think we actually have to have an equitable share. And so those who can afford more ought to do more, and those who can't may not be able to. And we have to understand that I think we have to contribute more in our communities. And then I think that there are just like wonderful models of people doing fantastic work all over. They're just innovations, and I think you've heard some of them articulated already. Talia just talked about a few of them. You got Project Optimist that is going on in St. Cloud, where this community has not had access to news media in a very long time, and here they're talking about it, solution-based journalism that's there in that community. I think you see traditional models of media shifting and changing, like the Strip, Star Tribune, where they are moved from just being a paper that's just in the Twin Cities to focusing all across the state and trying to get local journalists all across the state to be able to start to tell those stories throughout these smaller communities so that we get to cover greater Minnesota in a more in-depth way. And we've talked about Sahan Journal, and there's just so many other models. And I think the thing here is that I think we just have to be willing to invest and spark as many models as we possibly can. Mm-hmm. And then I think what we are looking for, and we heard this earlier, is as many bright spots as we possibly can have. And the goal is to start to knit those bright spots into a constellation. And I think that constellation is going to give us enough light to find the way forward. And that's what we're hoping as we invest in news media.
And Maribel, have you seen some examples of community members taking this into their own hands?
So I want to actually add a little bit to Tanya's first point of, we can do more. I think, and there are countless examples, and Minnesota certainly are filled with them, of strong local news organizations, diverse news organizations, organizations focused on covering underrepresented communities, sparking up, and many of them being successful. Ultimately, we could fill every county in America with great news organizations, but we haven't addressed the other side of the problem, which is that that's all focused on the supply side of the equation, and we have an enormous demand problem. We cannot ignore that. We can't make this seem like it's all about just we need more journalism, and yes, we need to strengthen journalism, but we need to find a way to reaffirm the value of journalism to community health. We have to work on that. Study after study shows that a majority of Americans believe that local news is important to their communities, and only 15% of Americans pay for news. That's a problem. That's a problem. If you have a favorite restaurant, but you don't go buy the food, and you don't go buy the drink, and you don't go tell your friends it's great, guess what's going to happen? It's not going to be there very much longer. We have to find a way I just saw a recent report, I forget who did the study, where Americans believe that the news media is doing just fine financially. We all know better, but we have a disconnect, an enormous disconnect, in one, transparency around the actual economics of news. Doing journalism is expensive. One. Two, at value proposition of what that's actually giving me in my life, in my community, how it's making it better, how it's really reflecting the whole of the community. It can't be about all the bad things happening only. We have to reassert that value proposition. We have to educate people that if they have a vested interest in it, if they see that value, then it absolutely is something that they should not only be paying for themselves, but they should probably be active themselves in the public policy debate about what their government should be funding and supporting to support journalism as a public good.
And Dale, what have you seen in terms of individuals or communities coming together and saying, hey, what can we do?
There's lots of assets in a community that you can partner with. So there's a lot of universities around, and it turns out that university students make really good reporters.
They do.
So in addition to Report for America, which is amazing, and I think should be triple the size that it is, we have a lot of universities. There's a great University of Vermont just got a huge grant to work with a bunch of communities where there are universities, but there's no news. And so how can you help those students? And they don't have to be journalism students. They don't have to have a full school of journalism at the university. You can make it a activity for someone. It's a great writing experience. It's great critical thinking experience. It's great youth development. So that's an asset in many places that over the next few years, I think you're going to see a lot more involvement of universities and colleges in helping their students fill some of those gaps. We also have great programs in terms of supporting. We decided that Press Forward needs a fifth pillar, and it needs to be communications. Because what Maribel is talking about is really important. When you talk to different newsrooms, they use different words. I don't even use the word journalism when I'm in Cleveland, because that's a thing certain people think about. I just say, where do you get your news and information? And then that sparks the whole conversation. We have to think about what's the terminology we're using in order to get at that value proposition. Because when you actually talk to people, they want local news. That is not a problem. The question is, how do we describe it, and how do we help them figure out how to support it? There are lots of ways to do that, actually. But universities, we have libraries that have been helping partner with local news stations.
That's great.
I think we keep thinking of this from a deficit perspective. And if you just think about, we have lots of assets in our communities. There's a group down in Mississippi. They lost their news. The local dentist started about 12 years ago a outlet with his wife, who's a nurse. They went to the judge and said, you think we should do this? And they are doing it. It is still there. They, in COVID, lost a few money for some of their reporters. They are using young people and seniors. They thought about it from an asset base. What do we have? We know people want this. It comes out once a week. It's not, daily.
Is it called, this is what we're hearing? What's it called? I love that.
I'm just saying, we have examples of this. Journalists don't do a good job of talking about what you do well. We have to figure out a way to explain that to people and to inspire others in other communities. If you can do it in Mississippi, you could do it in parts of here, right? There are tech issues. I get all of that, especially in rural places. But as someone said to me recently, and I really love this phrase, out of the crisis we are in, there is always opportunity. But you have to embrace that as a mindset and help find a little group in your neighborhood that really likes news and figure out jointly. Maybe you're sharing things on Facebook. The things about tech is we've got now full digital platforms or just on Instagram, right? I mean, there are ways to do this, but you do have to have a few people who are leading and who feel like they have support. Start a club for news in your community, and you guys just share some stuff, right? We used to do that all the time, to be honest. We just think other people will do it for us. We are the leaders we have been waiting for.
Thank you. I have a final question for each of you, but remind everybody, if you have a question, if you want to text it, please do that, and we'll get to the Q&A in a little bit. But I just would like to know, as we talk about our goals and our dreams for what journalism could be, how will you know that you've accomplished your goals? I mean, what does a thriving local news landscape look like? What will be an indication of like, oh yeah, we're seeing some success here when you think about that? Talia?
I think that looking at it as a sustainable model, when we can figure out a sustainable model for local news, we'll know we have succeeded. And I do think that there are positive things happening, like KXE with a membership model, and organizations looking at that membership model. I also think when we see more activity inside of our K-12 system, encouraging attention to accurate news and information and understanding how to fact check, we'll start to see cultural shifts in the future generations coming forward. And part of changing the demand and supply is creating like this, ensuring we have a younger supply with what the new wave of journalism and that talent pool needs to like look like to influence the sector in and of itself. And I love the comment about like a younger person doing journalism. That just gave me an idea that I'm gonna go home and make some phone calls with. I think that creating that interest is also really, really important. I know that you only asked me that question, but I also want to talk just briefly about access and thinking about how the culture of news has changed in America, and that we used to go to the dentist's office or the doctor's office or go to work, and the paper would be there, and that's how you read the paper. You didn't have to pay for it if you couldn't afford it. And the space of paywalls right now is really disincentivizing low-income community members from being able to access news and media. We do need to inform our legislators, and I think that part of understanding like success is when legislators are starting to take seriously how accurate news and media and the entire system of journalism is going to work in this state for everybody.
Tanya, what do you think success looks like? What are the signs that we do have a thriving local news landscape?
First, a bit of context. I would just say that I really believe that our democracy is very young in this country, and I'm not going back to the beginning of our country. I just think that we haven't really been practicing a full operating democracy. We haven't really been practicing it more than 60 years in this country. And where every person actually has a full voice, and we're actually struggling with, like every citizen actually has a full voice and can actually express their full citizenship. And you see today that we're actually struggling with that as a country. And we are polarized because of that as a country. And I guess for me, a fully functioning local media journalism system creates an opportunity for communities to really have an ability to debate issues and actually get access to information on both sides. And be able to really understand the issues that they face. And then I think the last thing I would just offer is that a functioning system, in my opinion, is going to be a system that really looks at a community in its wholeness and from an authentic view. So it is not stigmatizing. It is not focused solely on its deficits. It is focused on its assets. It's focused on solutions. And it's focused on uplift. And it doesn't mean that it ignores the negatives. It just means that that's not the primary way in which they approach community.
And Dale, what are some signs that we're accomplishing our goals? What does that look like?
Yeah, multiple signs I want to see, and I give it 5 years. I want to see policies in every state that allow for taxpayer dollars to support news. There are many ways to do it. And we have some bright spots in some states. They're starting, and we have a few organizations that are doing that. But we need more work in that space, and I think we can get there. Because I think when you talk to elected officials, they don't always want the reporters, talking about them. They do understand the importance of news in their regions. So a lot more policy work, and I think if we had, 25 states with, and they could be anything, scholarships, tax credits, I'll take them all. But everybody needs to be included, nonprofit, for-profit, not just the large entities. Let's be clear about that. That's one. So a lot more work in policy, because I think we can get there. Any other industry you have seen grow and get more sustained has government support in some way, shape, or form. News needs to be the same. We're not used to that because they had their own market solution. That market solution is gone. We need another one now. So that's one. Two is I don't want to have a conversation with anybody 5 years from now asking me why we should pay for local news. It should be like you pay for Netflix, and you pay for your gym shoes, and you pay for the swimming lesson for your child, and you pay for certain things, if you can, and I understand that not everybody can, it should be in your top 5 things that you help pay for. And it may only be $100 a year, right, to get it, I get that. But it needs to be something that we're thinking about. And that's the same in philanthropy. If you are an arts funder or an economic development funder or a housing funder, news should be, like Maribel's predecessor used to say all the time, something that you do as a second or third thing that you fund. And so I don't want anybody, which I have a lot of conversations right now with philanthropists, both individuals and foundations, that say, it starts out by saying, I am not a journalism funder. I don't want anybody to tell me that 5 years from now. I want them to say, I am using this as a tool in my strategy. Do you have ideas for a better way to use it? I want them to say, you know, I could only give $500,000 this year. I had to change it. But at least they're having the conversation about how to use it as a tool. I think all of those things. And then lastly, I'll just say, we definitely need diversified revenue models for all of our outlets. And even the for-profits are barely profitable. And so there needs to be a lot of conversation with publishers on how to help build their capacity to grow that diversified revenue. We have lots of bright spots. There are about 6 or 7 buckets. We know what they are. A lot of people don't know what they are because they're former reporters who were not business people. They're really well-meaning, but we can grow their capacity to be business people. So there's a lot of things to do. It's not one, but I think in 5 years, if we could see some movement in those areas, I think it would be really good.
And Maribel, at the Knight Foundation, when you guys talk about your goals, what are the signs that you're accomplishing them, that you're making progress?
I think we wake up for thinking about sustainability and what that looks like. And right now, it comes in a few forms. One is philanthropy needs to do the job philanthropy needs to do right now, which is move more quickly to create the conditions to expand that runway, to give the news organizations the breathing room to transform the business model. That's step number one, and we're doing that in a lot of different ways, helping to support infrastructure, technology, other things that drive efficiency, sharing best practices. The other piece is the ultimate path is absolutely about revenue diversification. We can't find ourselves in a place where we're beholden to any one revenue stream again. We need more diversity because, yes, consumers who can pay should be paying for news as a core value in their lives, but a lot of people can't necessarily do that, and the critical information should be accessible to them. So we need multiple revenue streams. We need government and policy to be at the table, absolutely, to support this as a public good, but we need Americans, we need citizens to believe that this is critical in their lives and demand it for themselves, demand it from their government, demand it from their schools. We should see information literacy, civics, basic civics education in every school, in every classroom, starting in kindergarten. Yep. And we need to re-educate and reinvigorate that this is the absolute most critical foundational piece of a government of the people, for the people.
All right, thank you to our panelists. We have time to share some of the questions from the audience members. And here is the first one I have here, and it says, Maribel, you said that we all in this room know better about the value proposition of news, but I'm not sure we do. As a newsroom leader, I speak with journalists every day who seem to think that there is money hidden away in the back room to pay them higher salaries and fund more ambitious projects, but we are all struggling. Even today, a Reading for America core member told me news should be free as it is a public good. Is there more we can do, or should do to provide more business literacy to journalists?
1,000% yes.
Who are providing this essential service to our communities. As journalists, do we not get it?
We don't get it often. That's true. Okay. That's true. I mean, look, I've been in every newsroom, I feel like some days. There's a big gap in just the basic business understanding, the economics of journalism. We can solve for that. We absolutely can solve for that. But we have to admit it first. That's the first step, right? I have come to believe that everybody who's, and I hope many more people do, choose to major in journalism should absolutely be required to take core business curriculum as part of that major. I think it's absolutely critical. You wouldn't think about it, even as journalists. How many reporters are in the room? Many of you might even cover the business community, right? Don't think that that's just about that knowledge that you have about basic economics and basic business practices and P&Ls. That's not about who you're covering, it's also about the business you're in. So it's really important. We have an active role to play in making the business stronger, in understanding our audiences better, in understanding what kind of content and in what ways is going to drive greater engagement and drive people's willingness to pay for that very important information. We play a critical role from the newsroom. It's not separate from us, because I don't think anybody should care more about the sustainable business model for journalism than the journalists in those newsrooms. So we've got to get a lot smarter about what drives the business and the actual facts about the economics of news.
Here's another question from an audience member. All of you have talked about multiple revenue streams to help fund newsrooms and changing the business model, but this person asks, if government starts supporting news, isn't that opening the door for conspiracy theories or interference? Any thoughts on that?
It is.
Talia?
It absolutely is. And so it has to be a really well thought out statute in terms of how it's delivered, who it's delivered by, what the transparency model is for that. We have policies like that. We have the community service block grant. There are statutes around how that is delivered, who can compete for accessing those fundings. TANF dollars have MFIP employment service funds where counties have to issue competitive RFP processes to local communities to provide those services. So it will take, the detail level of that technical work. But we're already at a place where people believe in conspiracy theories. We're not going to get past that. And we just have to figure out how to mitigate unintended consequences of doing something like this and study other policies that we have that include subsidies that do support this work, that have less problematic outcomes.
And we have just to give people information, we have an expert in the room who does this work on the policy side of funding local news. Rebuild Local News is one of the organizations. Just go on their website. They have 7 or 8 or 10 of the types of policies that could be instituted per city, per county, per state. They all take into account, they try to be future forward, they try to be, neutral in terms of conservative Democrat, they try to be, market related. I think I got the right words from Anna. There are ways to do this. It's not easy, policy is never easy, it's not quick, and you have to work on both the legislative language and then also implementation. But you can do it to mitigate as much as possible elected officials putting their own personal thoughts into exactly how it should be funded.
This isn't only an issue, by the way, in terms of potential government solutions. This is also something we should be very thoughtful about in terms of who's funding journalism. We've been talking a lot since we started today about the important role of philanthropy right now, but not everyone should be funding journalism. Certainly not people who are seeking to fund journalism for the sake of trying to influence what gets covered or how it gets covered. So transparency, I really believe, is a cure for a lot of these potential pitfalls. And I think it's going to be really important that we're clear-eyed about what are the clear guardrails that we're going to put in place before we agree to take money or to fund entities. In fact, Knight Foundation has just entered into a partnership with the Poynter Institute to create training for would-be funders of journalism. just as we want to get many more people off the sidelines, especially at the local level and the state level, to fund journalism, we don't take for granted that everybody knows what that means. It's important that they have some level of understanding before they jump into the funding of journalism of what it means to be influence-free and ethical and all of those things. So really, really important, not only in the government space.
Yeah, and I would add, every institution in this country, our Americans' trust is degrading. And we know that is true for journalism as well. And so what I would probably argue is this: if you want local journalism to grow, find local journalists, like people that you can actually see, touch, so that you can actually build trust in the institutions, so that people can actually see and know the people, right? And understand what they're trying to do and what they're attempting to do. I would say that, and then I think we have to just continuously push and practice independence and integrity with journalism. And I think the field of journalism needs to be a little bit tougher on itself. Like, we need to see some hand slapping that's a little, public, and when we see misinformation, disinformation, we need the field to show up and say, this is unacceptable, period, be it local, national, or whatever. And then the last thing I would just say is that, government funding is not a silver bullet. If you get government funding, expect to spend less time on journalism and more time on accounting and proving that you are not misspending citizens' money. So I just, it isn't an answer to all things. And I just want to make sure that we recognize that. And I think that's why we need to have multiple sources of funding going into those sustainability models when we think about journalism.
Our time is up, our hour is up. This has been a fascinating conversation for me as a news consumer and as a journalist. You all have given me hope, so thank you again for your time. I want to extend my thanks to our panelists again. We have Maribel Perez Wadsworth with us, the president and CEO of the Knight Foundation, Dale England, the national director of Press Forward, Tanya Allen, the president of the Minnesota-based McKnight Foundation, and Talia Palmer, the CEO and president of the Blanton Foundation. Thank you as well to Report for America for hosting this event with NPR News. And if you want more information about the organizations or the work that they are doing, you can find it at nprnews.org on my show page. And be sure not to miss part 2 of this discussion, a conversation with journalists doing the work that is coming up tomorrow. Thank you again to our guests.